All right. Well, maybe for the sake of getting everybody out of here on time, we can get going, and I'm sure other folks are going to begin to trickle in here. So I guess we'd just like to start by saying thanks to everyone who joined us for today for part one of this 4-part webinar series that our team is putting together on the NIST framework. Considerations for aligning to the standards within that NIST framework and solutions that we think can help organizations more easily align, within the standards of NIST. So, we're really excited to discuss this topic, especially as, we think the NIST framework is a great guide for helping businesses better understand, manage, and reduce their cybersecurity risk, and as well as protect their networks and data. So, without further delay, Kirk, I'll pass the ball to you and we can get started. But maybe before we do that, Kirk, I just want to say, if there are questions that come up, please feel free to put them into the Q&A, and then we'll try to take some time at the end to answer questions. So, yeah, I guess, Kirk, without further ado, I'll go to the next slide here, and I'll pass the ball to you.
Cool. Thanks, Pat. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. I see some familiar names out there and some that I don't know yet. Maybe we'll get to know each other. Like Pat said, we wanted to talk about framework compliance, especially as it relates to some of the solutions in the IBM and LRS portfolio. I'm positive that some of us in the call are familiar with NIST CSF, and you're joining the call more to look at the tooling side of it. But I do want to take a beat here at the beginning, a few beats even, to introduce the cybersecurity framework for anybody on the call that's looking to align for the first time to a framework of any kind. So the NIST cybersecurity framework, or CSF, is and this is from their own words, a voluntary framework developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology with stakeholders based on existing standards, guidelines, and practices. It is created through that collaboration between industry and government, and the framework exists. The overall goal is to promote the protection of critical infrastructure. And we've seen in recent years how critical some infrastructure can be that we may have not considered in previous years. Go ahead and hit the next slide, please. So one of the obvious reasons to align to a framework, especially a well-known one like NIST CSF, is regulatory compliance. But even if your organization isn't bound by any regulations or third-party agreements, there are still plenty of good reasons to pick a framework and to align. And again, I just want to reiterate that we're going to use the CSF, the cybersecurity framework from NIST, as our talking point through the series. It's not even the only NIST framework, let alone the only framework out there. But it's easier to have the conversation if we have something to track it against. So beyond being compelled through regulations or third-party agreements, other reasons to align, it gives us easier way to track progress, right? The nature of technology, as we all know, is that we might be very solid in an area today, and tomorrow we are less solid. That can be because we've acquired an organization, or we have been an acquired organization. It could be newly disclosed vulnerabilities, new regulatory requirements. All these things constantly shifting. Having a framework alignment allows us an easier way to track our progress as we increase our security. It makes decision making to be easier. And when we are constantly capturing our security posture and measuring it against a framework, and we can easily see our strengths and weaknesses, answering questions like, where do I spend my cycles or spend my budget, that becomes easier. Auditing is easier. Of course, when we are audited from external entities, they're going to give us the questions they want answers to. But sometimes if we're wanting to audit where we are for ourselves, for our own sake, or do a self-audit, we can kind of be left wondering what to look at. So with a framework alignment, we have those questions answered for us, or those questions derived for us. And then aligning to frameworks gives us preparedness for business moves. Whether that is making acquisitions or being acquired, all those types of activities, they require a lot of discovery, a lot of questions to be asked, both before, during, and after, or before and after acquisitions or mergers. This can take some of the guesswork out of that, and it keeps us ready to go for any new compliance that's coming along too. And then go ahead and switch, Pat, please. The last of these, why to align, I wanted to split it on its own slide because I think it's overlooked a lot. Professional growth. Cards on the table. We all individually, we're professionals looking to maximize our output and our growth as much as we can on a regular basis. So becoming well-versed in framework alignment and the tools and solutions that help cover requirements is it's about as edifying as can be from a career perspective. Getting proficient at that alignment, that aligning to framework, that's a boost for anyone's resume if you don't already have it on there. And, like other things, knowing multiple frameworks is great, having those multiple bullet points, but just having the knowledge and the experience of digesting controls and performing gap analysis and driving remediation, all that stuff, that's really a big boon to your stock. And much like for a resume, it's also a boon to your internal stock. So your reputation within the company that you currently work for is going to be improved. And not that anybody on the call needs improvement in that area, but anytime you're doing something like aligning to a framework where there was nothing before, you're going to get in front of the business more. You're going to know more about what's going on in the other departments. You're going to provide a more manageable means to answering questions from customers and third parties. So that internal stock you have with your leaders and with the other departments leaders is going to increase. Framework alignment requires a mindset where we're output focused and results oriented, driving towards this broad understanding of your organization and its systems, its information systems. So, those are qualities that are sought after and demonstrate an aptitude and a readiness for leadership. And in that same way, just in general, that personally having gone through framework alignment, you will find that, doors have opened and resume is made better. And every time you do something you haven't done before in this field, you have another bullet point on your resume. But I would venture to guess that something like a comprehensive framework alignment being on your resume might open comparatively more doors than maybe a single point solution deployment. Go ahead, Pat, next slide. So as technologists and technology leaders, as I look at who's on the call, we're pretty used to this idea of measuring what we are doing and what we ought to do against what other people are doing, right? So what's commonly done, what's industry standard, and that's familiar to us, and mostly it's worked for us. So in that same way, when we consider a framework alignment in this CSF specifically, we can kind of take a look and see who all else is aligning and why should I. So of course, the organizations like we talked about before that are bound by regulatory requirements, they're doing that, right? And that includes shops providing services to government entities. And the framework they're using depends upon the government and the entity and the service and all those different things. But looking at NIST CSF, it is derivative of other controls. So if you're looking for a framework to get started with, it can't hurt to start here because you're going to inherently cover some controls that would exist in other frameworks too. So beyond those that are required to align, other people that are choosing to do a framework alignment for their IT and IT security organizations are those who care about standards-based work, right? They want to do what the industry standard is. They want to be part of a community and have the ability to consult knowledge bases that others have worked on to get their answers, right? Organized leaders, that falls right in line with that. So organized leaders / well-oiled machines, well-oiled departments, these are all signs of people who are aligning to frameworks, and I didn't want to leave anybody out. So for the social butterflies, if you consult LinkedIn, I think everybody is aligning. If you go and look in the right places, as they say, you find what you're looking for. If you look for it on LinkedIn, everybody's framework aligned. Pat, go ahead. Okay, so we talked a little bit about why. I want to talk a little bit about what CSF is. I don't want to spend too long because we have other areas to get to, and in subsequent webinars we won't rehash all this information, but just want to make sure we're arming everybody with at least a base level of knowledge here. So the core, the framework core, is it's a set of desired cybersecurity activities and their outcomes, and it gets organized into categories, and organized that those categories are aligned with informative references. Again, it's derived from other controls, right? So the framework core is designed to be intuitive, and it acts kind of like a translation between different disciplines of teams. And those disciplines of teams could be different technological teams, it could be different teams within a business. But the idea is that it's simplistic and mostly non-technical language to drive increasing security, right? So the core includes, on screen here in the colored squares, the core includes 5 high-level functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. These 5 functions are not only applicable to cybersecurity risk management, but really to risk management at large. Go ahead. So this shows kind of how the core breaks down, right? It breaks down from function to category to subcategory. And in each instance of this series, we're going to talk about one of those first 4 functions we saw on the last slide. During each of these, we'll get all the way down into some subcategories. We won't cover all the subcategories. We also won't cover every technology solution that can help with all the subcategories. There's just not time in the day for that. But if you want to get into detail about any of these items, please reach out. This is, what we're here to do. We're here to drive discussion and, hopefully be able to help anybody out in the future. Let's go ahead and go to the next one, please. Okay, so you see the 5 functions on the left that we previously talked about. And here we also see the 23 categories that split out across those 5 functions. Today, we will be zeroing in on the identify function. So if we look at that top section to the right of the bright blue, we can see how that breaks down into the categories relative to it. It makes sense, of course, for identify to be the first function in this framework, or really in any framework. We've all said it, we've all heard it, you don't know what you don't know. So we can't work through those subsequent functions, the protect, detect, respond, recover. We can't protect the things we haven't identified, and we can't recover assets that we don't know exist. So it makes sense to be the first function. In looking at what we need to identify to get moving, so those first few rows there next to identify, if we look, it's devices, software, data, networks, flows, components, classifications, and more. We need to identify functions of our businesses, our various roles as we relate to other businesses and organizations. So not just an individual job role, but a role a business fulfills, right? We need to identify mission or missions and operating requirements. From a governance perspective, as we continue to work down that list, policies, roles, responsibilities, and we're talking internal roles, job roles, policies, roles, and responsibilities, regulatory requirements, and just general processes are kind of front and center when we get into the governance aspect of identify. Moving on to the risk assessment, that's just how it's identifying risks and thinking through them and how we respond to those. So when we get to this section, this is going to be where we see things like vulnerability detection and threat intelligence. And then finally, the final category there of the identify function supply chain or supply chain and risk management. This should be fresh on everyone's mind as we, in my view at least, are still coming back from supply chain issues that are years in the making and pretty quickly coming to light, or came to light pretty quickly, but we're still digging out of them. Pat, go ahead, please. Okay, so this drills down a little bit more into the identify function, and into the identify function asset management category specifically. So this gives us a bigger picture. There's just not enough slide room to show you these for each of the categories, but this is an example of what it looks like. As previously seen, that the asset management category is just one of the 6 categories in the identify function. Inside of that category, we have these subcategories. So as we work through this series, this webinar series, we're going to highlight different security solutions as they address these specific subcategories. There will be some general coverage, but we will get specific around the subcategories that can be met with particular tooling. And again, just to reiterate, we're not going to necessarily hit every subcategory, but we absolutely encourage anybody to reach out with any questions. If you're looking at framework alignment right now and have questions about specific subcategories or controls, that's what we're here to help with. Pat, let's go on. Okay, the identify function, just a little bit more particulars around this to kind of tee up our solution building that we're getting to here quickly. The identify function, it helps us understand critical assets and data, governance models, supply chains. It helps us to do that and to develop an understanding of those items and to manage the risk around them. The framework helps guide key decision points, especially around risk management activities. So the idea here is that with this framework, and again, in particular on the identify function, that the way it gets written out and the way we analyze it and the way we fill out our met controls or our unmet controls, it naturally becomes language that we can use everywhere from senior executives to all throughout the business, and even all the way down to our implementers and our ops folks as well, right? So everybody can kind of speak the same language. Remember, it's output driven, it's results oriented. So what we have on screen here is an example of a CSF scoring that we performed under our vCISO program for a CSF aligned customer. So it was very pertinent. While this exact type of scoring system may not apply to all frameworks, it does make a great illustration of how framework alignment can allow, an organization to be both comprehensive in its analysis of its controls and its security maturity, really, but also brief and easy to understand, right? So it's comprehensive in that we're going to go through every control and we're going to give it individual scores for particular levels of maturity in particular areas. But because it's so easily ingested, we can use this as a conversation piece to make many decisions around information security, cybersecurity, budgets, manpower. This is a screenshot of a section of it. This is a much larger spreadsheet that covers all the functions and categories and subcategories. So it would be a comprehensive gap analysis for that particular customer. And after that comprehensive gap analysis, which is the first step in any framework alignment, you have a clear view of which subcategories have the worst scores. And naturally, that gives us a great starting point for those conversations around how we're going to spend our time and our budget. Next slide, please. We wanted to get into a few, we can call them stumbling blocks, challenges, a few of the subcategories where we've had customers. Sometimes it's a little nebulous. Maybe they feel like it might be a challenge in understanding. Sometimes it's a challenge. They understand the requirement well. They aren't sure how to meet it. So we're not delineating which of these is which, but these are some stumbling blocks we have seen. So ID.am-1 devices and systems within the organization are inventoried. I'm tempted to say, when I look at the attendee list, I'm tempted to say I don't even need to go into detail on this, but I don't know everybody on there. But I think a lot of us have seen this, right? It is very, very difficult to have a comprehensive system and environment inventory. In the world of IT, it's almost a storied problem. It's almost the thing legends are made out of, that I finally know what all my devices are, what all the components in each device, what all my networks are. And when we get into asset management, it's broad and deep both. IDAM-4, external information systems, it's especially difficult cataloging systems that are external to the quote unquote corporate network. And as we continually kind of erode what defines the corporate network, it becomes even more difficult. Another AM one here, AM-5, keeping that second function of CSF in mind, if you remember, the need to protect, right? So how do we recognize what level of protection is afforded to some assets, or even prioritized differently based on those assets, if we haven't done some type of classification, whether it's the content or type of data contained, or the criticality of the system, or the value, right? A dollar amount. And then just working through these some more. We'll hear more later in the presentation, some of these, but these are common stumbling blocks. And again, some of these will be discussed later on. If you have specific questions outside of these, we're not here to talk only about these 7 controls. Go ahead, Pat. Challenges with aligning, it really can just be summed up in, we don't know what we don't know, right? So there are lots of challenges when we talk about discovering, these examples on screen in particular. There's endless challenges around identifying content of files and databases and what's in there and who's got access, as you see privileges on the right side. Discovering accounts, that's also a tale as old as time, and vulnerabilities as well, right? So we know that there are lots of tools out there for vulnerability assessments, but they work to varying degrees. And my view of it is they aren't all necessarily pointed at the most sensitive assets. They're not always pointed at where we know the crown jewels are, the data that means the most. Let's go ahead and jump one more. And lastly, before I kick it over to Pat, just kind of tee it up in everybody's mind, when we think about common technology spaces, or different types of software and tooling, and how they get lumped into industry terms. Some common technology spaces that we work in for dealing with the identify function are privileged access management, data access governance, or some people might just call it data security, and attack surface management. So if you're out there looking for what are people doing, and you're looking for solutions, and you're kind of looking at the controls, you might remember these terms, take notes of these terms. These spaces, these technology spaces, play into the identify function quite a bit. And with that, I thank you, everybody. I'm going to kick it over to Pat and give him all the time and attention.
All right, Kirk, thanks. And thanks for going through that. So I'm going to dive briefly into kind of a few of the solutions within those technology spaces that Kirk had discussed, and kind of specifically within the IBM security portfolio that we believe map to those different functions of the NIST framework, and particularly the identify function, although a few of these could probably even sort of be considered into that protect function as well too. But as Kirk had said before, if there are any of these that you're interested in learning more about after we wrap up today, get in touch with us. We'd be happy to set up some time to discuss further. So I think everyone on this call is pretty well aware that as enterprises continue to expand, so does the attack surface. The traditional kind of quote unquote perimeter continues to dissolve to support remote workers, manage third-party risk, and move mass applications and workloads to the cloud. So, an organization's digital footprint is now really kind of expanding beyond the purview of what can realistically be managed and be monitored. So I just kind of want to go through a couple stats here, just from left to right. The first stat here on the left is just really the result of quick expansion. Forrester estimates that about 30% of an organization's environment is likely unknown or unmanaged. And then this becomes a bit of a challenge because 7 in 10 organizations, that experienced a compromise, this was based on an unknown footprint. An older example of this would be in the case of the Equifax breach that happened a few years back. That was a result of an unmanaged and an unpatched asset. And unfortunately, kind of the traditional method of find and fix for vulnerabilities, is really not sufficient to meet the demands of today's high velocity, digital environment. So, to manage your attack surface effectively, we think that these are a few good use cases to keep in mind and to start with. I'm just going to kind of run through these very quickly. First things first, discovering exposure. This is all about visibility, and being able to have insights into your organization like an adversary would. Uncovering shadow IT, being able to identify unknown and unmanaged assets and close those gaps by integrating with an asset management, or a vulnerability management tool. Exposure prioritization. Again, this is about understanding the adversarial temptation of a particular asset. Managing M&A risk, being able to understand your assumed risk both pre and post acquisition. Real-time security agility, just ensuring that your team is prepared, in the event of, let's say, the next Log4j, for example. And then just continuing to exercise your security program and continuously validating exposures and programmatic controls, and just ultimately working towards, a more resilient security program. So all of what was kind of, discussed in those last couple slides I went through is where we think Randori, which, if you're unfamiliar, it's IBM's newest security software acquisition. It's where we think it can help. What it is it's an offensive security platform that integrates external attack surface management with ongoing posture validation. And it's meant to just increase, an organization's cyber resiliency. So just kind of going through this slide here, Randori Recon, just kind of think of it more in sort of those blue team, types of exercises, helps cover many of those use cases that I talked about on the previous slide by actively profiling an organization's external facing IT assets. It shows what a hacker would see when scanning for potential entry points, and it looks actively for any signs of unexpected changes. So this piece of Randori is really meant to uncover those blind spots, those misconfigurations, those process failures that otherwise may have been missed with no configuration required. And then Randori Attack, that you can see above there, leverages those findings from Randori Recon to then define and authorize continuous red team exercises by testing and validating current client controls and exposures. So in this slide just details how Randori empowers those security teams to operate confidently through each of these pillars that you see here. So what Randori does, it provides high fidelity discovery results. It starts with Randori knowing what is definitively you, and more accurately discovers things like shadow IT, IPv4 and IPv6 assets. And to be sure that you're confident in those targets that are identified, Randori provides a clear discovery path so you can follow the chain of ownership. So moving kind of left to right here, once you do have clarity around those identified assets, context then becomes really critical just to be able to understand what it is that you're even looking at. So many solutions, organize data by IP or domain, but then challenges like redundancy and the ability to know what actions to take can become hard. So what Randori does, it provides actionable insights by taking multiple detection sources and rolling them into a single target source. And those targets are based on things like temptation and client characteristic business context. And the targets are scored in a way that helps clients prioritize, those security efforts appropriately. And then Randori does have plenty of out-of-the-box integration, so a client can build out and leverage recipes, and operationalize in minutes. Just a couple examples of that. You could take those high-severity targets that Randori identifies and feed it into a vulnerability management solution to shift unknown shadow IT to known and managed, or you could open a ticket within something like ServiceNow for further investigations. So what Randori can do, reduce that risk of exposed services automatically, which is done through bidirectional APIs once it's been added to a vulnerability database, an action has been taken. And with some of those subcategories that, Kirk had mentioned previously, I think in particular with that RD.RA5, and I think it was RA4 as well, these are, I think, some of those subcategories where a solution like Randori could be really helpful, again, kind of in identifying those vulnerabilities. Okay, so we'll kind of move a little bit into the privileged access management side of things here. I think, everybody's kind of well aware that identity is really that first line of defense, in today's kind of ever-growing hybrid and multi-cloud world. And, it really is kind of the I guess, really that first shield in, in fending off these attacks. But I think as we're continuing to see here at LRS, and I'm sure that everybody on the phone is continuing to see, establishing identity trust is becoming really hard, just in terms of the cyber attacks are increasing in frequency and sophistication. With the perimeter continuing to expand, there's a lot of challenges with protecting identities that we're seeing, and some of these stats that you can see here below that came from IBM, I think really just kind of amplify that point that protecting identities can really be a challenge. And really, in terms of identities that are out there, we see privileged users as being the biggest risk, and protecting privileged accounts really can have the greatest impact on any cybersecurity strategy, especially as the scope of what needs to be protected expands. We've seen it where 40% of incidents involved an employee with privileged access to company assets. So the privileged account is really by far the attacker's preferred method of entry. And that's where they can get elevated access to various systems, by which they can inflict really extraordinary damage, compared to just a regular user account. So a robust, privileged access management or, PAM strategy can help to mitigate a lot of these risks. So I think, as we all know, there is a big cost incurred whenever there is a breach. I think, in fact, the average organizational cost savings in terms of reducing or eliminating insider risk via PAM tools is approximately $3 million. And additionally, we're seeing a big market shift occurring where, it's expected that by 2022, 70% of organizations were going to be implementing PAM practices, if they haven't already. So, in thinking of a privileged access management solution and what the key capabilities of a strong solution would be, we think it should include, the ability to discover, manage, and govern privileged accounts, being able to control access to privileged accounts, randomizing, managing, and vaulting credentials, as well as the ability to do monitoring, recording, auditing, and analyzing of privileged access sessions and actions. So those are, when we think of a strong, PAM solution, those are, I think, the fundamentals of really what should be, included. So today we're going to focus a little bit more in on IBM's PAM solution, which is IBM Verify Privilege Vault. Verify is sort of the umbrella that IBM hosts all of its identity and access management solutions under, and the privilege solutions under there as well too. So what Privilege Vault does is it makes it easy to identify all service, application, administrator, and root accounts across an enterprise. So, unlike traditional, maybe more complex PAM solutions, Privilege Vault is very easy to use. It's very fast to deploy, and can be deployed both on-premise and in the cloud. What it does, it establishes that secure vault to keep privileged accounts safe, discovers privileged accounts, manages secrets, delegates access, and sets up control sessions. So just to kind of dive into each of those a little bit further, those privileged credentials are stored in an encrypted, centralized vault with check-in and check-out functionality, which helps with password management for privileged accounts across the entire organization. This solution can also help curb account sprawl and discover privileged accounts that may have been previously unknown across the IT landscape. Those accounts can then be onboarded very easily, and a continuous process that is put in place from there, just to be able to remain in control of privileged access. And then to manage those secrets more easily, password complexity can be ensured, credentials can be automatically rotated as well. And in terms of getting access to this vault and access to these accounts, access can be set up using rule-based access control, as well as an approval process for third parties. There are preset rules that can be used to get value out of this solution quickly, and access can really be customized to whatever your company's role management strategy is as well. And then kind of finally, from a monitoring and controlling perspective, privileged credential use is available for kind of all of those, from monitoring and controlling. Those features are available just to further know exactly when, how, and why privileged credentials are being used within your organization. So you'll kind of see here just some of the differentiators between IBM's PAM solution and really just what else is out on the marketplace. Besides what you see on here, there's a couple other things that kind of come to mind as well too. Just in terms of security, there's multiple layers of security that are built in with easy access management for IT admins. It's something that's highly scalable from small to mid-sized needs all the way up to large scale distributed environments. It can support all major operating systems, databases, applications, hypervisors, network devices, and security appliances, both on-prem and in the cloud. It is always available. There's high availability and DR options, as well as backups, database mirroring, things like that. It's readily customizable, really just without the need for outside assistance, which I think is a really kind of strong differentiator between this and some of the other things that you see out in the marketplace, where a lot of professional services can be required to get things up and running. And then as we're kind of talking around NIST frameworks, and just kind of talking around compliance in general, this is a solution that is very auditable. So there's out of the box and custom reports that can help satisfy security regulations with minimal effort. And kind of really bottom line, as we see it with this solution, and this is a solution that the team at LRS has a lot of experience in. From privileged access management solutions, it's something that is faster. We see it as better, and delivers more value in those first 30 days than really any other PAM solution out there. And to kind of just wrap things up a little bit here from a data access governance and data security perspective, we'll kind of shift gears here into that. I've got a few stats in here, and I'm going to run through these fairly quickly. But and we've talked about this a little bit already. But as data moves to the cloud, really the obstacles, vulnerabilities just continue to grow. Hybrid and multi-cloud is just really thick with regulatory requirements for data security, data privacy, and data storage. And as data, continues to be that prime target for theft, because of its ability to be monetized and just used in ransomware attacks. And as the data footprint expands, so does the attack surface and the impact on a company's bottom line. God forbid something were to happen. So I just want to kind of dive into some of these stats below. And I think as you can kind of see here, a data breach can have really huge impacts from reputation loss, legal fines, remediation fees, client retention, and so on, all of which impact an organization's reputation, and their bottom line. For organizations of 25,000 employees or more, it's estimated that the average cost of a data breach is almost, $5.5 million. So that's nothing to, shy away from. And regulations aren't going away either. In fact, they're really, just continuing to expand. Organizations with a higher level of compliance failures, things resulting in fines, penalties, lawsuits, experience an average cost of a data breach that is, $2.3 million higher than for organizations with low levels of compliance failures. The clients really need solutions that help them simplify and accelerate that compliance process through automation. And because of these challenges, just really a smarter, continuous approach to data security is necessary, which is what IBM's Guardian Data Protection solution provides. And we'll kind of go a little bit deeper into each of the features that you see up here, in the coming slides. And I do want to add as well to Guardian, besides the data protection piece, it is somewhat of an expansive portfolio where it has solutions around encryption, encryption key management, vulnerability assessment. So it is kind of an all-encompassing sort of, portfolio when it comes to data security and data protection, solutions. Just kind of running through some of these real quick. Guardian can discover and classify both on-prem and cloud data sources, and it supports data discovery through a policy-based approach. So it has out-of-the-box and custom classifier policies that can be defined to perform, catalog or metadata discovery, which we think can help cover some of those identity functions Kirk had laid out before. Specifically, I think ID.AM4 was one of the ones around data classification, and it can also be used to perform exact data match and do unstructured data discovery as well too. So kind of at the heart of it, data protection is really what Guardian does best. And this data protection is most easily achieved through data activity monitoring via rule-based security and compliance policies that log and alert on unauthorized data access and suspicious activity, things like that. Guardian Data Protection provides both agent-based and agentless methods to monitor data sources, and it supports multiple monitoring methods, really just based off the type of data source and where it's located, whether that's in the cloud or in a data center. This screenshot on here, which I realize is hard to see, is actually an example of how an admin would define a set of discovery rules to identify regulated sensitive data in an on-prem environment. And Guardian Data Protection it's built to protect client data, again, no matter where it resides across a hybrid and multi-cloud environment. So it covers all major data sources, including databases, big data, files, mainframe, and various cloud data sources as well. Guardian Data Protection also offers various deployment options to suit the client's environment. So it supports deployment on several different cloud platforms and is available as a hardware or a software offer. And just kind of continuing on with some of these features, Guardian can perform vulnerability assessments to scan infrastructures like databases, data warehouses, big data environments, and so on, in order to detect vulnerabilities and suggest appropriate actions. It can identify exposures like missing patches, weak passwords, unauthorized changes, and misconfigured privileges. And it also, can offer analytical tools for deeper investigations into, risky users, and also can help you to prioritize cases as well too. And sort of within that respond realm of Guardian data protection, it can help to surface, data level security threats to improve security operations with, integrations to a solution like a ServiceNow, to your SIM solution. It can also improve, SOAR capabilities as well too, in terms of orchestration, automation, and response. There's also the ability within Guardian, which I think is really cool, to take real-time actions with blocking and redaction, via agents to stop potential threats as soon as they're spotted. So again, I know this is kind of another hard screenshot to see here, but this is actually showing the vulnerability assessment piece of Guardian with risk scores based on various data sources. Some of the things that are included in here are, the number of anomalies by source, severity of that anomaly, and what actions to take. If we look back at, I think it was ID.RA1, one of the subcategories that Kirk had mentioned that we talked about previously about the need to identify and document vulnerabilities. This is where we think, Guardian's vulnerability assessment capabilities can help in covering some of the needs of that subcategory. And really just the fact is Guardian customers are seeing results. So recently, IBM had asked Forrester to interview one of their longtime Guardian customers, put together some projections on potential benefits that Guardian can provide to new clients. And some of those highlights that came from that report are as follows. The likelihood of a data breach was reduced by 40%, increased automation savings, saved this company almost 80 hours of time while they were doing database analysis. And then it reduced the effort and time to prepare for an audit by 75%. That's a huge piece of this Guardian solution is, being able to help organizations stay in compliance with whatever sort of regulatory, compliance needs it is or standards that they have to adhere to. So, really kind of to summarize, this client was able to work more efficiently and better secure their data with Guardian. And if anybody's interested in seeing the full report on this, let me know, and I'm happy to get you guys the full report on it. So, and that was kind of all I had. So, Kirk, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add, or we can check the chat to see if there's any questions. But again, I know those kind of very high level going through those solutions. Again, if there's any that you're interested in hearing more about, let us know, and we're happy to set up some time to do that. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We're looking forward to talking with you again in a couple weeks. And if there's anything else needed, like we said, just get in touch with us, and we're happy to help.